Can you remember when you first became interested in fashion?
I first got interested in fashion as a teenager, but going to the flea market, buying some clothes, having looks, you know, preparing for looks to go out or whatever, and because of the music also. So I like to go out to the concert or things like that. So that was my first interest, was really trying to find some interesting and different clothes, you know. So I would take some vintage or maybe mix either like military jackets and at the same time 1940s dress, or, you know, do these kind of things. That was my first interest. Not as a child.
But as a teenager?
Yeah, I was not dressing my doll, you know, like usually the designers, no. It was as a teenager.
And from then on, did you know that you wanted to be a fashion designer?
No, I really, it was very simple and very sudden. It's at 18 years old, I wanted to stop studying. That was my first, and I had to, let's say, to find a direction very quickly, and I didn't want to stay too long in the family. Or so first thing I saw was my big sister. She found the Studio Berceau, you know, the school Studio Berceau. She found an advertisement, and she knew I loved also sketching, you know, drawing. So I went there and I met Marie Ruki, the directrice, and I really liked her a lot straight away. You know, I really thought, okay, that's my place. You know, I was not even thinking before. You know, it just came in a simple way. And from that time, I started doing my fashion school, my study, and I didn't question. I knew that's what I wanted to do, you know, and all the time until now, I know I'm on my path. How would you say, on my story? It's my story. Yeah, I never questioned it. Why should I do that or whatever? No second thoughts about it. I knew I loved it, and it was my story.
You showed your first kind of own label collection in 1986.
Yeah.
That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
How was it then kind of starting a new label in Paris?
At that time, you know, which is long ago, so I have to remember exactly. First, you know, it was not that easy for French people to have backers, or, you know. So I had, thanks God, the Italians were doing that at that time. So I was, how do you say, I was taken care, or no, how do you say, with the Italian, the backer and the industrial, the factories. So I started with the Italian backer, and did the first fashion show. I didn't even know what I was doing, because no, I knew what I was doing, but at that time it was not, everything was not that clear. And I know when I look at it now, the video, I laugh because I put so much into it, you know. That was like, it was like an explosion of everything I had in mind, I loved. And you know, I started with the music. For me, it was important to, at that time people wouldn't use the music, but I used the Velvet Underground music to just show exactly what was my background, what I love. Well, at the time I was very much into all this factory and the Sedwick and voilà. So that was my first fashion show. And there were not so many at that time. I
also think a lot of people have talked about the influence of the late 60s and the early 70s, and yes, quite specifically the 70s on your designs.
Yeah, especially at that time, yeah.
I think as well, because now it's quite a kind of popular reference point, but back in the mid-80s it was the last thing that fashion was referencing.
That's for sure, that's for sure.
What was it about that period, about kind of the 70s, that appealed to you?
I think Yeah, because of course I also love the 80s, you know. I was totally in my period of time, like where I would go out and or people I would meet and all. So I was really in the 80s. I was not stuck in the 70s. I was totally someone from the 80s, you know. But when I start really designing, I like the silhouettes, you know, like small shoulders, which of course you remember the 80s was like this kind of shoulder. So small shoulders, tight pants, low waist, like some references like that. And the 60s dress, I love the what we call la trois trous, you know, the three holes, what we call the little simple 60s dress. And I don't know, I think it also comes from what I, comment dire, emmagasiné, what all my experience since child to because when I refer to that collection, I think it's like a childhood for me, you know. It's like when I start, it's like being a child. And also some references were maybe what my mother was wearing, like maybe not the first one, but after very quickly I always had the trench coat in the collection because my mother was wearing a trench coat, or, you know, it's things, it's part of my history. And I love music. I think that's also one of the main reasons I love that kind of music. So then, like after all the David Bowie and all, you know, that was my kind of music. Even if I like also the one of the 80s or even now, whatever, you know, yeah.
I actually thought it was really interesting when you were talking about kind of the narrow shoulders and tight trousers, because that's very much a silhouette that's still influential today, and a silhouette that kind of everyone thinks of as being a very 90s silhouette, and to be kind of proposing that in the 80s was really sort of revolutionary.
Yeah, no, it's true, but at that time, of course, after you can look at it, because of course it was a very important silhouette for the future, but at the time it was really not expected. Neither me in a way, you know. I was not even really knowing how strong. But you know, it's like, you know, Véronique Leroy with the 80s, you know. When she started, Véronique worked with me long ago, and when she started with the 80s, it was a kind of shock also, you know. And after, it's also was very important in fashion. I think every time there's a designer who starts a new trend, you know, it's the cycles of fashion. But you're right, now it's very normal, because this silhouette I was working on, it's like you can see it everywhere, so you better think differently, yeah. No, and now I'm doing a lot of dresses also, you know, so that's also taking me a bit away from that.
To contrast the work under Martine Sitbon with the work you're doing now under rudiment, it's much more softer now and kind of more delicate and more fragile. I'm interested, as it's you designed both of the labels, but what are the differences between them for you? Is it a time difference, or?
For sure, it's a time difference, because of course, even if I say I keep doing the same thing, it's always done differently. Thanks God, I'm not. Yes, so it's I don't like the repeat. You know, some designers, they like to do the same thing all their life, and me, I'm more into the research of even if it doesn't show so well, but it doesn't show so much. I mean, but I'm always trying to move something forward, you know. So when I started rudiment, the things had changed, you know, in a way, because I had stopped for 2 years, and as you mentioned before, the kind of fashion I was doing was very much around. It was something that had become much more. I don't want to say common, but I don't know how to explain it. It was more, you know, it was nothing really. It
was the fashion. It was fashion that had become fashion. It was what everyone was referencing as well, I think. It kind
of exactly. Voilà. And so when I started rudiment, the thing, it was first to do something more couture. That was what we decided also with my partners. To do something a little more couture, so it would be different from Martine Sitbon, you know. And and little by little, I think it's coming. Last season, for example, I think it's not so far from Martine Sitbon. You know, when I look at it, you know, it's not so far. Ça me rejoint un petit peu.
That's a really interesting point. What is the process you go through when you're designing? How does it start for you? How does that kind of develop?
So, of course, it has changed. You remember '86? Bon, so all through the years, I did not always process in the same way. But you know, first I was looking a lot of vintage clothes, archives, books, military books, whatever. You know, I was a lot of documentation. You know, a lot. Always the photocopy and the things and the data, and more now I nearly don't look at anything. Yeah, just maybe 2-3 pictures or two, because I think I'm like a library myself. I became by digesting all these references and different period of time. It could be at some time it was historical, and then some other. Bon. Now it's like I start on draping few shapes, you know. For a few years I do that, not just last season, but for like maybe the last 10 years, draping shapes, trying to find maybe always a kind of either a graphic or a kind of embroidery, not embroidery, but a kind of treatment of the fabric, because I love treatments of fabric. So I start with these elements, and then from that on start doing few toiles, comment on dit les toiles, muslins. Yeah. And from that really have them worn by the girl and see what I feel is right or wrong for the season, and then from that I start and I do the collection. But I don't take so many elements. Before I used to love to mix all these reference and do shock with that. Now it's much more simple. But fashion is much more simple also. For me, it's really rewarding to have been able for all this time to be creating all these collections, you know, and having a point of view about the time, about, you know, it's very, very rewarding. It's very interesting, you know. I think I have it's kind of, even if it's not easy, I'm not saying it's an easy life, not at all, but it's a passionating life, because it's always changing also, and I like the change also, you know, so that's why I don't mind things changing. So rewarding, yeah, what else, I don't know, to come here, no, yeah, to be able to create. And it's my medium, you know, yeah.